In the spring of 1912, a 13-year-old girl in New York waited for a father who was never coming home. Benjamin Guggenheim had boarded the Titanic as a man with one of the richest names in America. He would be remembered as the gentleman who dressed for death, the man who gave up safety, the man who understood how a rich man was supposed to leave the world. History made his ending beautiful. His daughter had to live with what beauty left behind. Peggy Guggenheim did not inherit a father. She inherited a story people repeated with admiration, as if courage on a sinking ship could soften the damage done to the child left on shore. The world admired the legend of Benjamin Guggenheim's death. Peggy inherited the silence after it. And in that silence, something in her began to search. For protection, for a room where she belonged, for a man who would not vanish, for a name that did not make her feel smaller, for a home that could not be taken away. The public would later call her an heiress. It sounded simple, almost lazy. Heiress, a woman with money, a woman with access, a woman who could buy what she wanted, love whom she chose, collect paintings, collect houses, collect stories, and move through Europe as if the world itself were an address book opened for her convenience. But the word hid the wound. Peggy Guggenheim was born into wealth, but not into security. She carried a famous name that opened doors, while inside the family, it often reminded her she was not at the center. To the outside world, she was a Guggenheim. Inside the Guggenheims, she was the lesser branch, the embarrassing branch, the daughter of the man who left the fortune before the fortune became enormous. That was the cruelest part. She was called rich by the world and made to feel poor by her own family. The name gave her visibility. It did not give her belonging. She grew up close enough to money to understand its language, but not close enough to feel protected by it. She saw the mansions, the servants, the formal dinners, the inheritance games, the pride of men who built fortunes in metal and mines. She knew that to be a Guggenheim was to be measured in money, in beauty, in usefulness, in marriageability, in obedience, in whether you made the name look stronger or stranger. Peggy would spend the rest of her life trying to turn that measurement back on the world. She was born Marguerite Guggenheim in New York in 1898, into two families that understood status differently. The Seligmans had refinement, banking respectability, and the older Polish of families that reached society first. The Guggenheims had industrial force, mines, smelters, copper, silver, and the blunt power of new money. Her mother, Florette Seligman, came from one kind of wealth. Her father, Benjamin Guggenheim, came from another. Their marriage carried the old tension between money that wanted elegance and elegance that looked down on money. Peggy was born into that tension before she ever understood it. The house on East 72nd Street was built to impress. Marble, glass, tapestries, a staircase under a dome, rooms arranged like proof that the family had arrived. But a gilded house is not the same as a happy one. Peggy later remembered childhood not as comfort, but as a long agony. There were servants, rules, tutors, nurses, beautifying rituals, and the constant knowledge that her older sister Benita was the beautiful one. Peggy learned early that money could provide rooms without tenderness, food without appetite, clothing without confidence, and a family name without a place in the family. She adored her father. That made his absence worse. Benjamin was charming, handsome, unreliable, and often away. When he came home, he brought excitement. When he left, the house felt the lack. Peggy would remember his whistle years later, note for note, as if a sound could preserve the man better than the world had. But love did not make him steady. Affairs shadowed the marriage. His attention moved elsewhere. Peggy sensed more than a child should have to sense. She learned that a woman could live inside a grand house and still be waiting for someone to choose her. Then the Titanic turned absence into permanence. Benjamin had not even meant to sail on that ship. Circumstance put him there. A canceled crossing, a need to return to New York, business, family, timing. He boarded at Cherbourg with his valet and secretary, Victor Gilliot, and the ship entered history with all the arrogance of the age. 4 nights later, it struck ice in the North Atlantic. Benjamin's final conduct became part of Titanic legend. He dressed formally, refused panic, and prepared to go down like a gentleman. The story made him noble. It also made him gone. Peggy was 13. The age matters. Old enough to understand death. Young enough to make it personal in ways that would not fade. Her father's body was never recovered. His place in the world became a legend, while his daughter's place in the world became less certain. He had left the family partnership before the greatest wave of Guggenheim wealth arrived. The name sounded enormous. The actual inheritance was far smaller than people imagined. The uncles helped quietly for a time, but help is not the same as security when pride is involved. Peggy became something particularly painful in a rich family, the relative who looked privileged to everyone else and diminished to her own. That contradiction became one of the engines of her life. Peggy was never poor in the ordinary sense. She knew that. She could travel, she could buy, she could enter rooms. But in the small, ruthless economy of her class, she was not rich enough, not beautiful enough, not secure enough, not central enough. She lived under the insult of expectation. People assumed she had everything. She felt she had inherited a famous name with the warmth removed. Her face became another battlefield. Peggy grew up in the shadow of beauty and learned the cruelty of being compared. Her nose, especially, became a private obsession and a public weapon. In her early adulthood, she tried to have it changed. The operation failed. It made the wound worse. She would tell the story on herself later, as she often did, because if the world was going to laugh at her, she preferred to arrive first with the joke. But self-mockery is not the same as being unhurt. They judged Peggy's face for decades. Her nose, her mouth, her glasses, her strangeness. The irony was brutal. The woman mocked for how she looked would become one of the great eyes of the 20th century. That is one of the deepest reversals in Peggy's story. The world attacked the face. History would need the eye that did not come fully formed, the eye that had to be trained, embarrassed, corrected, sharpened, and tested. The eye that at first could barely understand abstraction. The eye that would later recognize value before museums did. The eye that would stand in front of work others dismissed and make a choice that changed an artist's future. But before art became a home, Peggy went looking for life in the places a young woman with money and loneliness might look for it. Travel, desire, marriage, bohemian rooms, dangerous men, and the promise that somewhere outside the family system, she might finally become real. Freedom first meant motion. She moved through America and Europe as if distance might rearrange the self. She flirted with reinvention. She entered Paris at a moment when the city could make recklessness feel like intellect and damage feel like sophistication. Lawrence Vail was the kind of man who could seem like an escape from everything Peggy had been trained to be. He was bohemian, theatrical, clever, unstable, and proud of not behaving like ordinary people. He seemed to offer a life outside the rules of Guggenheim money and Seligman respectability. Peggy married him quickly, almost defiantly, as if marrying danger could prove she was alive. But danger in a room is not always romance. Sometimes it is just danger with better lighting. The marriage became humiliating and unsafe. Lawrence could be charming in public and cruel in private. He drank. He raged. He made scenes. He turned domestic life into performance and punishment. Peggy's money did not protect her body. Her name did not protect her dignity. In the rooms where she should have had power, she was often still negotiating for safety. That is one of the hard truths beneath the glamour of her life. A woman can have money, servants, travel, and famous friends, and still be trapped with a man who knows exactly how to make her feel small. She had children with Lawrence, a son and a daughter. Motherhood did not settle the life. It made the fractures more painful. Peggy wanted freedom and attachment at the same time. She wanted desire, art, movement, and rescue. But children need steadiness, and Peggy had never learned how to build steadiness from the materials she had been given. Her daughter, Peggy, would become the most painful mirror of that failure. Even before the later tragedy, the pattern was there. Peggy searching for a home in men and ideas, while the child who needed a home in her mother's attention was often left waiting at the edge. Then came John Holmes, the man who seemed to Peggy like knowledge, authority, mystery, and danger combined. He was wounded by war, brilliant in conversation, full of judgment, and powerful in the particular way damaged men can become powerful to women who want to be remade. Peggy gave herself over to him with frightening completeness. He named her, criticized her, taught her, diminished her, fascinated her. What she called love often looked like surrender. She kept searching for a man who could guide her, reshape her, explain her to herself, because the first man who had made her feel chosen had vanished into the Atlantic. Again and again, Peggy looked for a man who could tell her who she was. Again and again, men found in her not only a woman, but a house, a checkbook, a passport, a gallery wall, a way into survival. That does not mean none of them loved her. It means love in Peggy's world was rarely clean. Desire came tangled with dependence. Genius came with cruelty. Need came dressed as romance. Men who spoke of art and freedom still knew how to use a woman's money, her rooms, her loyalty, and her hunger to be seen. John Holmes died suddenly after an operation, and Peggy was left with a grief complicated by relief. She felt freed and devastated at once. That contradiction says more about the relationship than any clean moral judgment could. When a controlling love ends, the person left behind may mourn the person and the prison together. Peggy did not know how to live without the force that had been shaping her. She feared she had lost not only a man, but the structure of her soul. Yet inside that collapse, another opening began. Douglas Garman came next, younger, political, handsome, and convinced that history belonged to revolution. He gave Peggy another language for importance. another way to be corrected. He wanted Marx when she wanted Proust. He wanted discipline when she wanted feeling. He could criticize her habits, her drinking, her reading, her class position, and her lack of seriousness. Once again, the pattern repeated. Peggy was surrounded by men who needed her money and judged her for having it. Men who accepted what she provided and then treated her as lesser for providing it. The old family humiliation had changed costume. It now wore the face of intellect. But Peggy was not only a victim of these rooms. That would be too simple and unfair. She could be sharp, difficult, needy, reckless, funny, selfish, generous, and alive to contradiction. She saw her own flaws with an almost brutal clarity. She often failed people. She also kept showing up for art before she knew art would save her name. Her life was not a lesson in pure suffering. It was a battle between the part of her that kept surrendering to people who hurt her and the part that was slowly learning how to choose. Art entered first as education, then as appetite, then as authority. At the Sunwise Turn bookshop in New York, she had found a room where money mattered less than books, talk, and looking. For the first time, people asked her to study, to look at paintings, to think about form, color, movement, and value. She was not born knowing modern art. She learned it. That matters because later critics would treat her eye as a lucky accident or the whim of a rich woman. It was not. It was built through embarrassment, instruction, argument, and risk. In that bookshop, the old measures loosened. No one was asking whether she was as beautiful as Benita. No one was measuring her against uncles or inheritance. No one was asking whether she was a good wife, a proper daughter, or a woman who knew her place. They were asking whether she could look. That may sound small, but for Peggy, it was a revolution. Looking gave her a power that did not depend on being desired. Looking gave her a way to judge the world back. In Paris and London, modern art became the family Peggy could choose. Not a family that ranked her by inheritance, beauty, or obedience, but one built from danger, taste, loyalty, and the stubborn belief that what others mocked might one day matter. Through Marcel Duchamp, she entered the rooms where the future of art was being argued into existence. Duchamp gave her vocabulary. He introduced her to artists. He helped her understand the difference between movements she had once blurred together. He did not simply flatter her. He educated her. And education gave Peggy something no lover had been able to give her, a way to trust her own attention. When she opened Guggenheim Jeune in London, the family name changed meaning. For once, Guggenheim was not only a burden she carried, it was a door she opened herself. The gallery was young, strange, risky, and not respectable in the old way. That was the point. Peggy did not want to preserve the taste of her uncles. She wanted to move toward the work that made people uncomfortable. She showed Jean Cocteau, Kandinsky, Yves Tanguy, and artists. Many viewers did not yet know how to see. She was learning in public, and the public can be cruel to women who learn before asking permission. The contempt came quickly. Some in the Guggenheim orbit saw her gallery as an embarrassment, a small shop borrowing a grand name. It was another version of the family wound. Peggy was again being told she had a name but not authority, money but not judgment, curiosity but not seriousness. Yet she kept looking. She kept buying. She kept choosing. That was the scandal beneath the scandal. Not that Peggy desired men. Not that she wore odd glasses or had unconventional lovers or made society uncomfortable. Her real scandal was that she dared to choose, before the world agreed she had an eye. It was easier to remember Peggy by the men in her life than by the artists she kept alive, funded, introduced, and protected. Lovers made better gossip. Judgment made better history. To reduce her to scandal was a way of shrinking her authority. A woman patron is easier to dismiss if she can be made into a romantic anecdote. But desire was not the measure of Peggy's achievement. The measure was risk. She bought work when museums hesitated. She paid artists when applause had not yet arrived. She put walls, rooms, shipping documents, rent, and belief behind a future that still looked strange. Then the war came closer. Modern art was no longer only controversial. In Europe, under fascism, it became vulnerable. Paintings could be seized, scattered, hidden, destroyed, or dismissed as degenerate. Artists could be trapped by borders, papers, visas, camps, and the terrifying speed with which a city could turn unsafe. Peggy began buying intensely, sometimes as if speed itself could become protection. One painting a day became the phrase people remembered, and it can sound obscene if told carelessly. A rich woman shopping while Europe breaks. The truth is uglier and more complicated. Peggy was not innocent in the face of suffering. She knew what she failed to do. She saw refugees in the streets. She admitted, with painful bluntness, that she drank champagne while desperate people passed through Paris. That moral ugliness should not be erased, but neither should the other truth. The paintings she bought were not ornaments for a rich woman's wall. In that moment, buying art could also mean saving what fascism wanted to scatter, seize, or erase. Peggy was flawed. She was also moving pieces of the future out of danger. She tried to place the collection safely. Institutions did not always understand what she was offering. Some saw little value in the crates. They were wrong. The works moved under ordinary labels, treated like household goods, as if the future of modern art could be hidden among chairs and linens. That phrase, household goods, is almost perfect for Peggy. She had spent her life looking for a household that could hold her. Now she was packing art as if it were furniture for a home that did not yet exist. In the south of France, she became involved in the desperate rescue networks around Very and Fry and the Emergency Rescue Committee. Papers, visas, signatures, money, train routes, hotel rooms, luck. Artists and intellectuals waited in fear while bureaucracy decided who might live freely and who might be trapped. Peggy helped finance escapes. She helped André Breton and others move toward safety. She was not the only rescuer. She was not a saint. But she put money where danger was. And money, in those months, could become time. Time could become a visa. A visa could become survival. Max Ernst entered her life out of that world of flight and danger. He was beautiful, mythic, damaged, and already surrounded by the ruins of other loves. Peggy helped him. She married him. She wanted from him recognition, desire, and perhaps the confirmation that she was not only a patron, but a woman worth choosing. But Max, like so many men around her, brought art and injury together. He accepted her help, her house, her money, her access, and her devotion. He also made her feel unseen. Even in rescue, Peggy was not fully seen. She could save a man, fund a man, house a man, and still become the woman waiting outside the celebration. When they reached New York, the center of gravity shifted. Europe had broken open, and artists came across the Atlantic carrying exile, memory, hunger, and work. Peggy created Art of the Century in New York, and this time, the gallery was not simply a room with paintings. It was a declaration. It was her answer to every person who had treated her as a woman with money and no authority. She did not ask the old museums to validate her eye. She built a place where her eye became the rule. Art of this century was alive in a way ordinary galleries were not. Rooms tilted the senses. Paintings floated, appeared, disappeared, changed with light and sound. The gallery did not ask visitors to stand politely before art they already understood. It forced them into a new kind of looking. Peggy had learned from the avant-garde that the room itself could become an argument. She made the argument public. Here was a woman mocked for her face, dismissed for her unconventional private life, doubted by her family, and corrected by men for decades. Now she had built one of the most radical art spaces in America. The irony is sharp. Peggy had spent her life being told she did not know enough. Yet she became one of the people through whom Europe's modernist fire entered American art. She did not do it alone. Duchamp mattered. Herbert Reed mattered. Howard Putzel mattered. Artists, critics, dealers, rivals, lovers, enemies, and accidents all mattered. But Peggy mattered too. She mattered not because she was perfect, but because she acted before certainty arrived. She bought. She showed. She paid. She risked looking foolish. She risked being wrong. The future of taste often depends on someone willing to look ridiculous in the present. Then came Jackson Pollock. At first, Peggy did not fully see him. That is important. It keeps the story honest. Pollock was difficult, rough, emotionally dangerous, and not easy to sell. His work unsettled people, but others urged her to look again. Mondrian saw something. Peggy listened. She did not need to be the first person in the room to understand him perfectly. She needed to be the person with the money, the walls, and the courage to act once she understood enough. Peggy did not simply discover Pollock. She bought him time. She turned money into months, and months into paintings. That is the part of patronage people forget. Genius does not live on genius alone. Someone has to pay the rent before the world is ready to applaud. Someone has to risk being mocked for supporting the thing that does not yet look profitable. Peggy signed him to a monthly arrangement against future sales. It was not glamorous. It was practical. It gave him space to work. History loves the word genius. It is less interested in the woman who paid for genius before genius could pay for itself. Pollock was not an easy man to support. He drank. He scared people. He did not fit the polite model of the grateful young artist. But Peggy saw enough to continue. She gave him exhibitions. She commissioned a large mural. She put her reputation behind him before his reputation could protect hers. Later, when Pollock became a towering name in American art, the story would often move toward the male artist, the male critic, the male myth of the tortured genius. Peggy's role could be made decorative, almost accidental. But there is nothing accidental about a check written month after month before the market arrives. It is worth pausing there, because this is where Peggy's power becomes clearest. She did not paint Pollock's canvases. She did not invent his hand. She did not suffer his childhood or carry his demons, but she created a condition in which his work could continue. She turned patronage into time, and time into possibility. That kind of power is quieter than genius, and because it is quieter, history often treats it as secondary. But without walls, rent, introductions, contracts, and belief, many geniuses remain private disasters. Peggy understood that art needed more than inspiration. It needed infrastructure. She became part of that infrastructure, even when the men inside it forgot to thank her. At the same time, Peggy's private life continued to fracture. Max Ernst drifted toward Dorothea Tanning. The marriage ended. Peggy's daughter Pegeen was no longer a child, but not fully safe in herself. Peggy's relationships with her children had always carried distance, guilt, need, and confusion. She loved them, but love did not always become presence. She wanted to be needed and feared being trapped by need. She wanted to be mother, sister, friend, muse, patron, lover, and child all at once. No one person could hold all those roles without breaking under them. Pegeen became the wound that made the collection less triumphant. Peggy had spent her life building a home for art, but the child who needed a home inside her mother's attention was often left outside it. That sentence is not meant to condemn Peggy as a monster. It is meant to keep the victory honest. A woman can change art history and still fail in the rooms where history cannot applaud her. Peggy's life does not become smaller because of that contradiction. It becomes more human. The tragedy of Pegeen also forces a harder question about women who build public legacies from private damage. What happens to the child of a woman who is always trying to survive her own hunger? Peggy had been a daughter searching for a father, a wife searching for recognition, a lover searching for direction, and a patron searching for authority. But Pegeen needed something less dramatic and more difficult: steadiness. She needed a mother who could remain in one emotional place long enough for a daughter to feel held. Peggy loved her fiercely, but love does not always teach a person how to stay. After the war, Peggy eventually left New York and found Venice. The Palazzo Venier dei Leoni on the Grand Canal was unfinished, low, strange, and perfect. Not a palace in the usual towering sense, but a place that seemed to understand incompletion. Peggy bought it, renovated it, and installed the collection: Calder, Brancusi, Tanguy, Kandinsky, Ernst, Pollock. Works bought in fear, desire, argument, exile, and risk now hung beside the water. The household goods had finally become a household. Venice was not Peggy's escape from life. It was the first place where leaving stopped. The girl who had lost a father, a fortune, husbands, lovers, and finally a daughter built a house where at least the art would not abandon her. The palazzo became museum, salon, home, stage, refuge, and performance. Tourists wandered through rooms where she lived. Visitors found her answering the door in a bathrobe. Dogs followed her from room to room and rode in the gondola. She wore enormous butterfly sunglasses that became so famous they almost replaced her face. But the glasses were more than a costume. They were a shield and a frame, the wound covered by an object that was itself a work of style. People laughed at the glasses, admired them, copied them, photographed them. Few asked what they protected: the face that had been mocked, the nose she had tried to change, the eyes that had learned to see. In Venice, Peggy turned self-defense into iconography. The glasses hid what the world had judged and enlarged what history needed: her gaze. The palazzo was full of art, but it was also full of ghosts. Benjamin's whistle, Florette's distance, Lawrence's cruelty, John Holmes's control, Max's absence, Pollock's debt, Pegeen's silence. The collection did not erase them. It arranged them around something that stayed. Peggy had never found a person who could fully become home for her. So she built one from paintings, sculpture, dogs, water, and rooms that strangers could enter without taking it away. Peggy's death in 1967 shattered the final illusion of triumph. She had struggled for years through depression, drinking, pills, difficult marriages, and the ache of never being securely held. Her death was officially linked to barbiturates and alcohol. Peggy resisted the idea that her daughter had chosen death. Denial can be another form of love when truth is too sharp to touch. She called Peggy daughter, mother, friend, and sister to her. The words revealed the confusion and depth of their bond. Peggy had needed Peggy in too many ways. Peggy had needed from Peggy something steadier than Peggy knew how to give. The collection was becoming permanent. The daughter was becoming unreachable. That was the cruelest split in Peggy's life. The art stayed. The child slipped further away. In the palazzo, Peggy kept a space for Peggy's work and memory. Bright paintings, tender scenes, a room apart from the great names that filled the rest of the house. It was not enough. Memorial rooms never are. But it was Peggy's way of keeping the daughter inside the home she had built for art, even after she could no longer keep her in life. In her later years, Peggy became almost inseparable from Venice. The gondola, the dogs, the roof, the sunglasses, the visitors, the rooms open to the public. Illness came. Age came. The body weakened. But each evening, as long as she could, the ritual continued. Water carried her through the canals. Light moved across stone. The city turned violet, then silver, then dark. For a woman who had spent her life in departure, repetition became a kind of peace. In 1976, the collection passed to the Solomon R. Guggenheim Foundation. There is irony in that. The family institution that once looked larger than her became the keeper of what she had built by refusing to remain small. Her art would stay in Venice. The palazzo would become a museum. The works she had created as household goods, hidden, shipped, unpacked, hung, moved, and guarded, would finally stop traveling. A woman who had spent a lifetime searching for belonging had created permanence outside the family rooms that made her feel lesser. Peggy died in Italy in 1979 after a stroke. Her ashes were brought back to the garden of the palazzo, where she was buried beside her beloved dogs. The stone was simple. Peggy Guggenheim. Not wife of, not daughter of. Not mistress of, not scandal of. Just the name she had spent a lifetime turning into something more than inheritance. Today, people still walk through the palazzo. They stand before Pollock, Brancusi, Kandinsky, Tanguy, Ernst, Calder. They see modern art made safe by time, framed by museum walls, insured, explained, absorbed into culture. It can be easy to forget that much of it once looked strange, grotesque, unserious, impossible, even worthless to the wrong eyes. It can be easy to forget that before the art was canon, someone had to be foolish enough, wounded enough, stubborn enough, and hungry enough to believe in it. Peggy Guggenheim was not the heiress who bought modern art for decoration. She was the unwanted Guggenheim who turned money into a home for art because she never found one secure enough for herself. Her life was full of privilege, and that must be said. But privilege did not spare her from humiliation, violence, grief, loneliness, or failure. Money opened doors. It did not guarantee tenderness. A famous name brought attention. It did not bring belonging. Men loved her, used her, taught her, hurt her, and depended on her. The family name gave her a place in history before she had earned one. Her eye made that place her own. So the question is not whether Peggy Guggenheim was scandalous. She was. The harder question is why scandal remained the easiest way to remember her. Was she reduced to her lovers because desire made a better story than judgment? Was she mocked for her face because admitting her eye was too uncomfortable? Did she collect art because she had too much money, or because art was the only thing that stayed when people did not? In the end, Peggy did not simply save modern art. Modern art saved the part of Peggy, her family, her lovers, and the world never knew how to value. And in Venice, at last, the woman who had spent her life looking for a place to belong built one that still has not left.